What happens when one Beatle falls in love with another Beatle's wife? In the early 1970s, George Harrison confessed to Ringo Starr, "I'm in love with your wife." And that single moment nearly blew the band's family apart. And I want to know why all this happened. Before we begin, we need to identify our five main characters in the story. And no, it's not the usual five. The four Beatles and George Martin. It's George Harrison and his wife Pattie Boyd, Ringo Starr and his wife Maureen, and George's PA, Chris O'Dell, who is one of the key sources for this video and has spoken out about this time period. For context, the main story all takes place around 1973 to 1975, but if you know the exact dates, let me know in the comments. So who was Pattie Boyd? Pattie Boyd was one of the ultimate muses of the 1960s rock scene, but before that she was just a young model trying to make it in swinging London. Born in 1944, Pattie quickly became a familiar face in fashion magazines with her big eyes and classic Dolly Bird look. Her life completely changed in 1964 when she was cast as a schoolgirl in A Hard Day's Night, the Beatles' very first film. On set, she caught the attention of George Harrison, the band's quiet lead guitarist. George was instantly smitten and asked her out right away. At first, Pattie was already dating someone else and actually turned him down. But George wasn't discouraged. He asked again and she eventually said yes. And now on to Ringo's wife Maureen. Well, Mary Cox was born in 1946 in Liverpool and had a bit of a rebellious streak from the start. As a teenager, she remembered turning her school uniform around to make it look like a frock and paying a school friend 10 cigarettes a day to teach her how to smoke properly. She ditched convent school as a teenager to work as a hairdresser at Ashley Dupree. And around that time, she started calling herself Maureen, though most people knew her by her nickname, Mo. Liverpool's music scene was exploding and Maureen dove right into it. She was dating Johnny Guitar from Rory Storm and the Hurricanes when, at just 16, she crossed paths with Ringo Starr at the Cavern Club. Ringo asked her to dance, and honestly, that was it. Her life changed in that moment. She was a fan whose dream had come true. Maureen had been one of the many girls who lined up outside the Cavern, hoping to snag a spot at the front and maybe catch a Beatles eye. Everyone had their favourite, and for her it was Ringo. From that point on, things moved quickly. Maureen was soon hanging out with the rest of the band and joining in on their whirlwind adventures as the Beatles took on the world. Before long, she found out she was expecting Ringo's baby. So, in February of 1965, the two made it official at Caxton Hall Registry Office in London. She became public when she went to visit Ringo getting his tonsils removed at the hospital. In the early days of her life with Ringo, Maureen kept things pretty low-key. She wasn't interested in the spotlight and she mostly steered clear of the press. Instead, she focused on looking after the kids and even spent time replying to Ringo's fan mail. Maureen was not quite so mouse-like when other women showed too much interest in Ringo. After George's then PA, Chris O'Dell, had chatted innocently with Ringo at a party, Maureen phoned Pattie for a description of who and what she was. They were always holding hands. Each time Maureen picked up a cigarette, Ringo would appear next to her with a lighter. He'd look at her adoringly, she'd look at him lovingly, and when she exhaled, she'd lower her eyes as if the moment was too intimate. So, how did all this affair business start? Well, Ringo bought Tittenhurst Park in 1973, the old home of John and Yoko, after John and Yoko left for America. Tittenhurst Park is a huge Georgian mansion set in 72 acres of land in Berkshire. It's famous in Beatles history because Lennon shot the Imagine video there in 1971. When Ringo took over the property, he renovated it and made it his family home, filling it with his art and drum kits. It wasn't far from the home of Pattie and George, Friar Park, which was only half an hour drive away. George and Ringo had never fallen out after the Beatles had broken up and had remained close friends. George had played guitar on Ringo's first solo album, Ringo, in 1973. So they would see each other all the time. Right, okay. But when did Pattie first notice that something wasn't right? Pattie's suspicions were first aroused when she returned home from her mother's in Devon and found some photographs that George had taken of Maureen at Friar Park during her absence. A little strange, right? taking pictures of your best friend's wife? And then she further discovered that a necklace that Maureen often flaunted in front of her had been a gift from George. George admitted nothing when asked about it. Things moved along as normal, and Pattie found it all a little strange, but not enough to say anything at first. Before long, George didn't wait until Pattie was out of the house to see Maureen. Late at night, when Pattie was all alone in Friar Park's great halls, Maureen would just show up on the pretext of listening to George in the studio. George often had all types of musicians around and recorded a lot of demos there, especially for his solo album All Things Must Pass. And Maureen would still be there in the next morning without any shame or apology. Her attitude was very much that she had the right to spend the night with George if she felt like it. The so-called affair soon began happening during the day, unapologetically and out in the open. One time, he disappeared with Maureen into the house's upper regions, while musicians were waiting to begin work at his home recording studio. I thought, this is being deliberately rubbed in my face. He and Maureen want me to know this is happening. She asked him if he was sleeping with her, and he denied it. You must be, she said. What else are you doing? He was making her paranoid. Finally, one day she went to find them. It was a 20-bedroom house, so that was difficult on its own. And then when she found them, she hammered on the door. George opened it, and Maureen was on the mattress on the floor, not saying anything. She's just a bit tired, he said. She's having a rest. Well, who has a rest like that? Pattie then attacked her with water pistols. So, I've heard this story numerous times reading biographies on the Beatles, and I'd always assumed that they'd been found in the nude in George's bed. But reading about it, it doesn't say anything specific in any of the sources that I've read, but from what I can gather, she was fully clothed, simply lying on the mattress. It's a little bit strange, yeah, definitely something not quite right, but not exactly incriminating. Someone as aloof as George Harrison could pass it off, and he did. Pattie would say to Maureen, "What the hell are you doing here? I've come to listen to George play in the studio." "Well, I'm going to bed." "Ah, well, I'm going into the studio." "Have you thought about your children? What are you up to?" "I don't like it." Tough. Pattie blamed drugs as a factor in George's growth. She said that smoking weed had changed them all early on. Weed in the 60s was about peace, love, and increasing awareness. It was the heart of flower power, and it had gotten them in the habit of taking drugs as a regular thing. But now cocaine was the drug of choice, and cocaine was different. Pattie said that it froze George's emotions and his heart. Not really what you need from the quiet Beatle who already could be emotionally distant. Pattie felt that she could take it no more and had to tell Ringo. She told him, "Have you ever thought about why your wife doesn't come home at night? It's because she's here." Ringo then flew into a rage, something very unlike him, and refused to listen to what she was saying, and he denied it. Regardless of all this, somehow they all remained close. They soon all had dinner at Tittenhurst Park, and that's when George felt it best to drop the bombshell. George told Ringo, "I'm in love with your wife." There was absolute silence, as if everyone's hearts had stopped beating at once. Finally, Ringo looked at George and said, "Better you than someone we don't know." However, there's also an account from Pattie where he worked himself up over it, saying over and over again, "Nothing is real, nothing is real." Kinda repeating Lennon's Strawberry Fields mantra. Nevertheless, after the dinner, Pattie was furious and went out and dyed her hair red, a clear sign of protest. Did George not like red hair or something? Or is this just her showing her independence? Despite all of this, Ringo still invited them to the New Year's Eve party several weeks later. Or it could be months. Again, if you know, correct me in the comments. When Pattie realised she'd forgotten something, she ran from the car into a house, just before they were about to set off. From her bedroom window, she actually saw the car drive off without her. George could be a real son of a bitch. And it was just another strong sign that their marriage was almost at the end. Who would do that to their wife? When she eventually arrived at the party, she asked him for a divorce. Shortly after all this, she went off to America to join Eric Clapton on tour. But that's a story for another time. Eventually, George's passion for Maureen eventually burnt out. Maybe George wasn't interested now that his wife had left him, or maybe they both decided it was for the best to leave things for the sake of his and Ringo's friendship. We don't know why. Their affair had been brief, but it caused such friction between her and Ringo that they divorced the following year, in 1975. When asked about what he thought about it all, John Lennon actually called it virtual incest. Several years later, George and John met up in the New York Plaza, and sort of reminisced and remembered the time that the Beatles came here in February of 1964 at the height of Beatlemania. After dinner, Maureen joined them, and they actually chatted casually as if nothing had ever happened between them, as if their affairs hadn't been the final blow to each other's marriages, and like they didn't have any lasting impact on each other, which I really doubt. In the end, it was Ringo's own affair with model Nancy Lee Andrews that brought the struggling marriage to an end. He and Maureen divorced in 1975 after 10 years of marriage. Ringo agreed to give his ex-wife custody of their children and a one-off payment of £125,000, along with £23,000 a year plus £2,500 a year for each of their children. After the divorce, Maureen went through a really dark period. She was so devastated that she once rode a motorbike straight into a brick wall in what was believed to be a suicide attempt. Thankfully, she survived with only minor injuries. For a while after that, Maureen kept a pretty low profile. She stayed out of the public eye until the 1980s when she met Isaac Tigrat, the founder of Hard Rock Cafe and the House of Blues. The two of them married in 1989 and later welcomed a daughter, Augusta. On the 8th of December 1980, Lennon's ex-wife Cynthia was staying at Maureen's home in London when Maureen received a phone call from Ringo saying that Lennon had been murdered in New York. Sadly, Maureen died at the young age of 48 in 1994 from complications from leukemia. Maureen's 4 children, her 82-year-old mother, her husband Isaac, and her ex-husband Ringo were all at her bedside when she died. So now you're all asking the same question, right? Why? Why did all this happen? Why did George turn his back on his wife of so many years, only to fall in love with his best friend's wife? Why would he want to do that to Ringo? How could he even do that? Well, I've got a few ideas. Their connection was forbidden. She was Ringo's wife and he was married to Pattie. There's something dangerous and attractive in that, and I think neither of them could resist it. Maureen had always had a bit of a rebellious streak from her youth, and maybe by marrying the safe Beatle at such a young age, it may have brought this side back out of her. George's marriage with Pattie Boyd was collapsing also under his constant affairs. He was drifting, lonely, and often sought comfort outside of his relationship. George was a hippie. Maybe more of a hippie than John Lennon. He may have felt things like marriage and ownership just didn't have a place in the modern world, and that he was free to explore his attractions and urges, whether it be emotionally or physically. The Harrisons and the Starrs were very close socially. They often visited each other's homes, Friar Park and Tittenhurst Park. It's this close proximity that allowed them to grow their connection. If George had, say, been living in New York, it's unlikely that any of this would ever have happened. And maybe, and I'm not blaming him before all you Ringo stans come at me in the comments, but maybe Ringo was a little bit to blame for the way he took Maureen for granted. Ringo himself has admitted that he was unfaithful, heavily drinking and partying constantly. I was a drunk, a wife beater. I was a womanizer. It's not an easy thing to say, but I was all of those things. He has this inferiority complex about him. Maureen Starkey said of Ringo in a rare 1988 interview with Le Chroniqueur, "He just wants me to constantly reassure him that I love him because he gets afraid. We would be lying in bed and he would hold me close to him and say, 'Do you really love me?' I would have to constantly reassure him that I did love him, that I did care for him, and I think he was really pleased to hear me say that to him. He was so afraid that I might not love him." Another thing maybe, by the early 70s, George was seen as the most spiritually serious and the mysterious of all the Beatles. He was deep into his Indian philosophy, meditation, and his music. He may have just seemed mysterious and sexy to Maureen, very different from the marriage that she had with her husband, who was a little bit more meat and potatoes than George. Maureen and I were friends until the day she died, and she never once said to me that her relationship with George was anything more than an emotional entanglement. She always called it the situation. Honestly, Chris, this thing between George and me, it's not a physical relationship. It's emotional. Maybe George saw Maureen in a way that Ringo didn't, and that was irresistible to her. It's a shame that we'll never really know. With both of them gone, we'll never know what went down in those years in the early 1970s. What we do know is that their affair brought down the last 2 of the 4 original Beatle marriages. While we can list a range of different factors that drew these 2 together, what remained at the centre of their relationship is a mystery. Did they ever sleep together? Did they really deeply love one another? Were they better suited together? Who knows? Thanks very much for watching, all you rock and rollers. Well, join in. What do you think happened between George and Maureen? Is there any details that I'm missing out on? Please don't be afraid to let me know down below in the comments and I'll join in on the discussion. As always, the number one way to grow my channel is to like and subscribe, so go do that and I'll see you all down the road.